The phone rang at exactly 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before answering that my mother's voice would carry that particular tone she reserved for delivering life-changing ultimatums. Standing in my grandmother's kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes after another sleepless night worrying about property taxes, I watched steam rise from my coffee cup as her words shattered everything I thought I understood about family loyalty. Stop being selfish, that's a free house. Either share it, or you're not my daughter anymore. The deed lay spread across the oak table where Grandma Helen had taught me to bake her famous apple turnovers, and suddenly 40 years of memories felt as fragile as autumn leaves. They're coming tomorrow with a realtor. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, Mother's ultimatum echoing through rooms that had sheltered 3 generations of women in our family. The Victorian house on Maple Street wasn't just 4 walls and a roof to me. It represented the only stability I'd ever known inherited when Grandma Helen passed away 18 months ago after a brutal fight with pancreatic cancer. I remembered her final weeks vividly, how she'd gripped my hand with surprising strength, despite the morphine coursing through her frail body. "Dottie, this house needs to stay with someone who understands its soul," she'd whispered, her blue eyes still sharp, even as her body failed. "Your parents see dollar signs, but you see home. Promise me you'll never let anyone convince you this place doesn't matter." That promise felt like a sacred vow, especially considering how I'd been the only family member willing to move in during her illness. While Mom and Dad stayed conveniently busy with their social calendar in Phoenix, and my sister Madison pursued her marketing career in Manhattan, I'd taken leave from my teaching job to become Helen's full-time caregiver. We'd spent countless hours in the sunroom, her sharing stories about the house's history, while I helped her navigate insurance paperwork and medical appointments. The irony wasn't lost on me that now, barely a year and a half later, those same absent family members were demanding I surrender everything Helen had entrusted to me. Madison hadn't visited once during Grandma's final months, claiming work obligations prevented her from traveling. Yet somehow she'd found time to research the property's current market value down to the nearest $1,000. Curiosity drove me to open my laptop and search for Madison's social media accounts, something I rarely bothered checking. What I discovered made my stomach drop like a stone into dark water. Photo after photo from the past 6 months showed my sister lounging in an obviously expensive Manhattan penthouse designer handbags, casually displayed on marble countertops, captions mentioning new beginnings and unexpected blessings. The most recent post, dated just 3 weeks ago, showed Madison signing papers in what appeared to be a luxury real estate office. Her caption read, "Sometimes the universe provides exactly what you need when you need it most. Grateful for second chances and new opportunities that allowed me to finally get my dream home." My fingers flew across the keyboard as I dug deeper into public records and property databases. What I found made my chest tighten with a mixture of rage and disbelief. 6 months ago, Madison had received a substantial settlement from her ex-husband's family trust, something related to business assets from their brief marriage that had ended 2 years prior. The amount wasn't publicly disclosed, but property records showed she'd purchased a $2 million condominium in Lower Manhattan without requiring any mortgage financing. She already had her dream home. She'd been living in luxury for months while demanding I sacrifice my security for her supposed housing needs. The phone rang again, and Dad's gruff voice filled the kitchen when I answered. "Dottie, your mother told me about the conversation you two had this morning. I want you to understand something important about family obligations and doing what's right." "Dad, I need to ask you something directly." I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "Did you know Madison received money from the Patterson Family Trust?" A long pause stretched between us before he cleared his throat uncomfortably. That's not relevant to this situation. What matters is that you have a house you didn't work for, and Madison needs help establishing herself properly. The fair thing would be to split the proceeds so everyone benefits equally. Everyone except me, I pointed out. I'm the one losing my home. You can find another place to live with your share of the money, he replied dismissively. But this house is too valuable for one person to hoard selfishly. Besides, your mother and I have been discussing our retirement plans, and selling this property would help us secure the cruise package we've been saving toward for years. The truth crystallized with shocking clarity. This wasn't about helping Madison or family fairness. This was about my parents wanting access to money they felt entitled to, money tied up in a house they'd never bothered to visit while their own mother was dying within its walls. I see, I said quietly. So you want me to sell my home so you can take a vacation? Don't twist this into something ugly, Dorothy. Dad's voice carried that warning tone he'd used throughout my childhood. We're offering you a generous solution to a complicated situation. You can take your share and start fresh somewhere else, or you can choose to destroy this family over a piece of property. But understand this clearly: if you refuse to cooperate, don't expect to remain part of this family moving forward. After hanging up, I sat in Grandma Helen's favorite rocking chair and tried to process the magnitude of what they were asking. They wanted me to abandon the home where I'd found peace, surrender, the financial security Helen had specifically provided for my future, and smile gratefully while they distributed my inheritance according to their convenience. The worst part wasn't their betrayal. The worst part was realizing they genuinely believed they were being reasonable. Sleep proved impossible that night, so I spent the dark hours pacing through rooms filled with memories, trying to understand how my family had reached this point of calculating cruelty. By dawn, determination had replaced despair, and I decided to approach this situation like the research project it had become. My first stop was the county courthouse, where I spent the morning reviewing property records and inheritance documentation. What I discovered made my suspicions about Madison's motives seem almost naive by comparison. She hadn't just been pressuring our parents to convince me to sell. She'd been actively working to establish legal claims on the property through forged documents and false statements. Mrs. Rodriguez, the clerk who'd been working in the records department for over 20 years, helped me navigate the complex filing system. Your sister has been quite persistent, she mentioned while pulling documents from various folders. She submitted multiple affidavits claiming she provided significant financial support for your grandmother's care, along with receipts for medical equipment and home modifications. I examined the papers with growing disbelief. Madison had somehow obtained copies of legitimate medical bills and supplies, then created documentation suggesting she'd personally funded thousands of dollars in caregiving expenses. The signatures on several affidavits looked suspiciously different from Madison's usual handwriting, and dates on some receipts had clearly been altered. "This is completely fabricated," I told Mrs. Rodriguez, showing her my own carefully maintained records of every expense related to Grandma Helen's care. "I have bank statements proving I paid for all of these items myself. Madison never contributed a single dollar." Mrs. Rodriguez studied the documents with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every variety of family financial dispute. "You should definitely have an attorney review these filings. Some of these appear to have irregularities that could constitute fraud if submitted with intent to deceive." From the courthouse, I drove directly to the office of Margaret Chen, an elder law attorney recommended by Mrs. Rodriguez. Margaret listened to my story with patient attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timeline and documentation. "The good news is that your grandmother's will was properly executed and witnessed," Margaret explained after reviewing my paperwork. The bad news is that your sister's fraudulent claims could complicate any sale process and might give her grounds to file a civil lawsuit claiming partial ownership. Even though her claims are baseless, defending against them could cost you thousands in legal fees. There's something else troubling me, I admitted. The way Madison knew exactly what questions to ask about property values and how quickly she moved to file these documents. It feels like she had professional guidance from someone familiar with real estate manipulation. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying my face carefully. Have you considered hiring a private investigator? If your sister is receiving advice from someone with experience in property acquisition schemes, it would be helpful to understand who's really driving this pressure campaign. That afternoon, I met with Sarah Williams, a former police detective who'd transitioned into private investigation work specializing in financial fraud cases. Sarah had a no-nonsense approach that immediately put me at ease, and her rates were surprisingly reasonable for what she described as a straightforward background check and relationship analysis. "Give me 72 hours, Sarah said confidently. If your sister is working with someone, I'll find the connection. These property manipulation schemes usually involve patterns that are easy to trace once you know what to look for." While Sarah began her investigation, I spent the evening researching property values in my neighborhood more thoroughly. What I discovered made my situation even more complex than I'd realized. The house that my parents claimed was worth around $400,000 had actually been appraised at $725,000 just 6 months earlier. The significant difference wasn't due to market fluctuation. It was because someone had been deliberately providing false valuations to encourage below-market sales. The next morning, Sarah called with preliminary findings that transformed my understanding of the entire situation. "Your sister is involved with Daniel Richardson, CEO of Richardson Development Corporation. They've been dating for approximately 8 months, and she's been feeding him insider information about neighborhood property owners who might be vulnerable to pressure sales." "Richardson Development," I repeated, recognizing the name from recent local news coverage. "Aren't they the company trying to buy up this whole area for some kind of luxury development project?" "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "And here's where it gets interesting. Richardson needs to acquire a minimum of 85% of properties in your specific area to meet zoning requirements for their planned apartment complex. Without certain key properties, particularly corner lots like yours, the entire project becomes financially unfeasible." The implications hit me like ice water. Madison wasn't just dating Daniel Richardson. She was serving as his intelligence gatherer, identifying which families could be manipulated into selling their homes below market value. My forced sale wasn't about family fairness or even my parents' retirement cruise. It was about clearing the final obstacle to a multi-million-dollar development project. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I traced the false property appraisal to a company that Richardson Development uses regularly for their acquisition projects. They deliberately undervalue properties to convince owners they're receiving fair offers when they're actually being cheated out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. That evening, I sat in Grandma Helen's kitchen with all the evidence spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle that finally formed a clear picture. My sister wasn't just betraying our family for personal gain. She was participating in a systematic scheme to defraud elderly homeowners throughout our neighborhood, using intimate family knowledge to identify the most effective pressure points. The phone rang and Madison's bright voice filled the room when I answered. "Hey, Dottie, I just wanted to check in and see if you'd had time to think about our family discussion. I know this feels overwhelming, but I really think selling is the best choice for everyone involved." "Madison," I said carefully, "can I ask you something? How long have you been dating Daniel Richardson?" The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to hear traffic sounds in the background before Madison finally responded. I don't know what you mean. Why would you ask me something like that? Because I've spent the last 2 days researching property records and development permits, and your boyfriend's company has been systematically targeting our neighborhood for acquisition. I'm curious how long you've been helping him identify vulnerable homeowners. Another pause, then Madison's voice returned with a harder edge I'd never heard before. You've been investigating me. That's really invasive and inappropriate, Dottie. My personal relationships have nothing to do with our family's property decisions. Your personal relationships have everything to do with it when your boyfriend stands to make millions if he can force me to sell my house, I replied. How long have you been planning this, Madison? When did you decide to use our parents' financial desperation to manipulate me into giving up my home? The line went dead, but I wasn't surprised. Madison had always been skilled at avoiding conversations when she couldn't control the outcome. What surprised me was how calm I felt despite everything I'd discovered. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had a clear understanding of what I was fighting against. More importantly, I had begun developing a plan to fight back. The next morning brought an unexpected visit that shattered what remained of my faith in family loyalty. I was reviewing Sarah's complete investigation report when I heard familiar voices on the front porch, followed by the doorbell's cheerful chime. Through the window, I saw my parents standing with Madison and a man I didn't recognize, all of them looking serious and determined. Opening the door felt like inviting wolves into the henhouse, but I'd learned enough about their true motivations to face this confrontation with something approaching confidence. Mom immediately pushed past me into the living room, her face flushed with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Dorothy, we need to have a serious conversation about your attitude toward family responsibility, she announced, settling into Grandma Helen's favorite armchair without invitation. Your father and I have been discussing this situation extensively, and we've decided to help you understand some things that might change your perspective. Dad followed more hesitantly, his eyes avoiding mine as he took a position near the fireplace. Madison entered last, accompanied by a tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit, who radiated the kind of quiet authority that comes from controlling significant wealth. Dottie, I'd like you to meet Daniel Richardson, Madison said with forced brightness. He's been helping our family understand the current real estate market and the opportunities available to us. Daniel stepped forward with a practiced smile and extended his hand. Ms. Patterson, I've heard so much about you from Madison. She speaks very highly of your dedication to family. I ignored his outstretched hand, focusing instead on my parents' uncomfortable expressions. Before we continue, I think honesty would be refreshing. Mom, Dad, why don't you tell me about your financial situation, the real one, not the version where you need cruise money? The silence that followed was broken by Dad clearing his throat nervously. I'm not sure what you mean by that comment, but your tone is unnecessarily hostile. I mean the foreclosure notice on your Phoenix house, I said quietly, watching their faces change. I mean the gambling debts that have been accumulating for the past 3 years. I mean the maxed out credit cards and the second mortgage you took out to cover Mom's shopping addiction. Mom's face went white, then flushed red with embarrassment and anger. How dare you investigate your own parents like we're criminals? What we do with our finances is none of your business. It became my business when you decided to use your desperation to justify stealing my home, I replied. Sarah Williams is very thorough in her research. She found the court documents, the credit reports, everything you've been hiding while pretending this was about family fairness. Dad collapsed into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. You hired a private investigator to spy on us. Your own family. The same way Madison hired her boyfriend to spy on our neighbors, I shot back. The same way you forged Grandma Helen's medical records to make it look like Madison contributed to her care. Did you really think I wouldn't discover the truth eventually? Madison's composure finally cracked, revealing the calculating person she'd become. You have no idea what you're talking about, and you're making serious accusations that could be considered slander. Actually, they're documented facts, I said, pulling out the folder Sarah had prepared. Would you like to see the copies of your fraudulent affidavits, or maybe the bank records showing you never spent a penny on Grandma's care, or perhaps the property assessments proving your boyfriend's company has been deliberately undervaluing homes in this neighborhood? Daniel Richardson spoke for the first time since his introduction, his voice carrying subtle menace despite his polite tone. Ms. Patterson, I think you're misunderstanding some complex business relationships and making assumptions that could put you in legal jeopardy. Madison and I have a personal relationship that developed completely separate from any professional activities. 8 months ago, you started dating my sister, I said, consulting Sarah's timeline. 7 months ago, your company began targeting this neighborhood for acquisition. 6 months ago, Madison received her inheritance settlement and started pressuring our parents to convince me to sell. The timing is remarkably convenient for a coincidence. Mom suddenly burst into tears, covering her face with shaking hands. We never meant for it to become this complicated. Madison promised us $50,000 if we could convince you to sell voluntarily. We need that money, Dottie. The bank is going to take our house next month if we don't catch up on payments. You promised them what? I asked Madison, genuinely shocked by this revelation. Madison shot our mother a furious look before turning back to me with false calm. I offered to help our parents through a difficult financial period. That's what family members do for each other. Using money you don't have to buy property you're not entitled to, I pointed out. Where exactly were you planning to get $50,000, Madison, your boyfriend's company? Daniel Richardson's smile had completely disappeared, replaced by the cold expression of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through intimidation. I think this conversation has become unnecessarily personal and unproductive. Perhaps we should focus on practical solutions that benefit everyone involved. The practical solution is for you to leave my property immediately, I said firmly, and for my family to understand that this house is not for sale at any price you're willing to offer. Dad looked up from his hands with desperate eyes. Dottie, please. If we don't find a way to raise money quickly, we're going to lose everything. Your mother's medical bills from last year's surgery combined with my business losses put us in an impossible situation. We're not trying to hurt you, we're trying to survive. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my parents. They weren't evil people, just desperate ones who'd been manipulated by Madison's lies and Daniel's promises. But understanding their desperation didn't mean I was willing to sacrifice my future to enable their poor decisions. Dad, selling my house won't solve your financial problems, I said gently. It will just transfer your crisis to me while making Madison and her boyfriend richer. There are other ways to address debt and foreclosure that don't involve destroying your daughter's security. Madison stood abruptly, her mask of family concern finally slipping completely. This is ridiculous. Dottie, you're acting like a spoiled child who refuses to share her toys. That house represents hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting idle while your family faces real hardship. That house represents my home, my financial security, and my grandmother's trust in my judgment, I replied, none of which I'm willing to sacrifice for your boyfriend's business project. Daniel Richardson moved toward the door, clearly recognizing that his presence was no longer welcome or useful. Madison, perhaps we should give your family privacy to work through these personal matters. Ms. Patterson, I hope you'll reconsider your position before circumstances force less pleasant alternatives. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as he left, followed by Madison, who paused at the door long enough to deliver one final attempt at manipulation. You're destroying this family over a piece of property, Dottie. I hope you can live with that choice when Mom and Dad lose their home because you refuse to help them." After they left, I sat with my parents in the heavy silence that follows emotional explosions. Mom had stopped crying, but kept dabbing at her eyes with tissues. Dad stared at the floor as if answers might be written in the pattern of Grandma Helen's antique rug. "I'm sorry you're facing financial difficulties," I said finally, "but I'm not responsible for fixing problems I didn't create, especially not by giving up the only security I have in this world." "We know," Dad whispered. "We just hoped. Madison made it sound like there might be a way for everyone to benefit. We never meant to hurt you, sweetheart." "I believe that," I replied. "But I also believe you need to understand something important. Madison isn't trying to help our family. She's using your desperation to advance her boyfriend's business interests. She's been lying to all of us from the beginning." The conversation that followed was painful but necessary as I shared everything I'd learned about Madison's deception and Daniel's development scheme. By the time my parents left that evening, they understood the full scope of how they'd been manipulated. But understanding the truth and accepting it are two different things. As I watched their car disappear down Maple Street, I realized this battle was far from over. Madison and Daniel Richardson had underestimated me once. I was determined to ensure they wouldn't get a second chance. That night, I couldn't escape the weight of everything I'd learned about my family's willingness to sacrifice my future for their immediate needs. As I sat in the kitchen where Grandma Helen had taught me that real strength comes from protecting what matters most, my phone rang with a call that would transform my understanding of the entire situation. "Miss Patterson, this is Catherine Richardson. I believe my ex-husband visited your home today, and I think we need to talk." The voice was cultured, confident, and carried an undertone of shared experience that immediately captured my attention. "Catherine Richardson," as in Daniel Richardson's former wife, former business partner, former wife, and current advocate for people being victimized by his property acquisition schemes, she replied with bitter humor. "I've been following his activities in your neighborhood, and I have information that might help you understand what you're really fighting against." An hour later, Catherine arrived at my front door carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of understated expensive clothing that suggested both wealth and excellent taste. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with silver-streaked auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that missed nothing as she surveyed my grandmother's home. "Beautiful restoration work," she commented, running her hand along the original woodwork in the entryway. "Daniel always preferred destroying historic properties rather than preserving them. He thinks character is inefficient." We settled in the living room with tea, and Catherine began sharing a story that made my family's betrayal seem almost insignificant by comparison. 5 years earlier, she and Daniel had been equal partners in Richardson Development, a company they'd built together from nothing into a regional powerhouse specializing in residential and commercial projects. Daniel was brilliant at identifying opportunities and securing financing, Catherine explained. "I handled design, community relations, and project management. We made an excellent team until success changed him into someone I didn't recognize." The transformation began when Daniel discovered how much money could be made through aggressive property acquisition rather than collaborative development. Instead of working with communities to improve neighborhoods, he shifted toward identifying vulnerable property owners who could be pressured into selling below market value. He became obsessed with maximizing profit margins through what he called strategic persuasion, Catherine said with obvious distaste. He started hiring people to research homeowners' financial situations, family relationships, and personal vulnerabilities. Then he would design customized pressure campaigns to force sales. Like using my sister to manipulate my family, I said, understanding beginning to dawn. Exactly like that, Catherine confirmed. Daniel has a particular talent for identifying people who can be convinced to betray their own families for the promise of financial gain. He's very skilled at making betrayal seem like family loyalty. Catherine opened her portfolio and pulled out dozens of documents, photographs, and legal papers. When I discovered what Daniel was doing, I tried to stop him through company channels. He responded by systematically destroying my role in the business, stealing clients, and eventually forcing me out through a combination of legal manipulation and financial pressure. The divorce had been equally brutal, with Daniel using his knowledge of Catherine's personal relationships to turn mutual friends against her. By the time the legal proceedings concluded, she'd lost her business, most of her assets, and several friendships that had lasted decades. But he made one crucial mistake, Catherine said with a smile that suggested revenge served cold. He assumed I would disappear quietly and never interfere with his business again. Instead, I've spent the past 3 years documenting every illegal and unethical practice he uses, building a case that will eventually destroy everything he's stolen. Why are you helping me? I asked directly. What do you gain from getting involved in my situation? Catherine's expression became serious as she considered her answer. Because Daniel's schemes work by isolating victims and making them believe they're fighting alone against impossible odds. When people understand they're part of a pattern rather than facing unique circumstances, they become much more effective at defending themselves. She pulled out a detailed map of my neighborhood marked with colored pins indicating different types of properties and ownership status. Daniel needs to acquire 85% of the properties in this area to meet zoning requirements for his planned development. He's already secured 78% through various pressure tactics. Which means my house is critical to his success, I realized. Your house and 3 others are absolutely essential, Catherine confirmed. Without those specific properties, particularly your corner lot, the entire project becomes financially impossible. Daniel has already committed millions of dollars to this development based on the assumption that he can force the remaining holdouts to sell. What happens to his investment if he can't complete the acquisition? Catherine's smile became genuinely warm for the first time since she'd arrived. He faces financial ruin. The investors backing this project have very specific requirements about property acquisition timelines. If Daniel can't deliver the necessary properties within his contracted deadlines, they can withdraw funding and demand immediate repayment of all advances. The implications were staggering. By refusing to sell my house, I wasn't just protecting my own interests. I was potentially destroying Daniel's entire business empire and preventing him from victimizing other families in the future. I want to help you turn this situation into something that benefits your community rather than enriching Daniel, Catherine continued. I know people who would be very interested in purchasing your property at full market value while ensuring it can never be used for commercial development. She introduced me to Marcus Williams, director of the Neighborhood Preservation Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating affordable housing and community resources in areas targeted by aggressive development. Marcus had been searching for months for a property in exactly my location to establish a community center serving elderly residents facing housing pressure. We can offer you full market value plus legal protections ensuring the property will remain residential in perpetuity, Marcus explained during our phone conversation. Additionally, we're prepared to offer you employment as our community coordinator, which would allow you to remain in the house while helping other families resist similar manipulation tactics. The offer was everything I could have hoped for: fair compensation, continued residence in my grandmother's home, meaningful work helping others, and permanent protection against future development pressure. But more importantly, it represented a way to honor Grandma Helen's memory by transforming her house into exactly the kind of community resource she would have supported. "There's one more element to consider," Catherine added as our meeting concluded. "The Neighborhood Preservation Foundation has an excellent legal team experienced in challenging fraudulent property schemes. If you decide to move forward with this sale, they can also help you file complaints against Daniel and Madison for their illegal activities." That night, I sat in Grandma Helen's favorite chair and tried to imagine what she would think about turning her beloved home into a community center. The more I considered the possibility, the more right it felt. Helen had always believed that homes should nurture families and communities, not serve as profit centers for greedy developers. By morning, I had made my decision. I would sell my house to the Neighborhood Preservation Foundation, accept their job offer, and help them build the legal case that would finally stop Daniel Richardson's predatory business practices. But first, I wanted to give my family one final opportunity to witness the consequences of their choices. Catherine and Marcus were happy to coordinate the timing of our transaction to maximize the educational impact on everyone involved. The trap was set. Now I just needed to wait for Madison and Daniel to walk into it. The next week passed in a blur of legal consultations, property inspections, and secret negotiations that felt like planning a military operation. Catherine Richardson proved to be an invaluable ally, her knowledge of Daniel's business practices, allowing us to anticipate and counter every potential obstacle to our plan. Marcus Williams and the Neighborhood Preservation Foundation moved with impressive efficiency, conducting their property assessment and financing approval within 72 hours. The legal team Catherine recommended reviewed every document with meticulous attention to detail, ensuring our transaction would be absolutely bulletproof against any future challenges. Daniel will try to claim the sale was invalid due to family pressure or mental duress, warned Jennifer Santos, the foundation's chief legal counsel. He's used those tactics before when property owners found ways to escape his schemes. We need to document that you're making this decision freely and with complete understanding of your options. The documentation process was surprisingly thorough, involving video-recorded statements, independent psychological evaluation, and multiple witness signatures confirming my mental competency and freedom from coercion. By the time we finished, there was no possible argument that my decision had been influenced by anything other than careful consideration of my own best interests. Meanwhile, I maintained the illusion that I was still considering my family's demands. When Madison called to check on my progress toward making the right decision, I expressed uncertainty and asked for more time to consider all the options. When Dad called to apologize for the confrontational meeting, I accepted his apology graciously and suggested that perhaps we could find a solution that worked for everyone. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding your financial situation," I told him during one particularly emotional conversation. "Maybe there's a way to help without me losing my home entirely. Could you give me until next week to explore some possibilities?" Dad's relief was audible through the phone. "Of course, sweetheart. Take all the time you need. Your mother and I just want what's best for everyone, including you." The hardest part was listening to my parents' genuine gratitude while knowing they were still planning to betray me for money they would never actually receive. But Catherine helped me understand that protecting myself didn't require feeling guilty about my family's poor choices. "They've had multiple opportunities to choose your welfare over their financial desperation," she reminded me during one of our planning sessions. "They've consistently chosen to prioritize their immediate needs over your long-term security. You're not responsible for rescuing them from consequences they've created through their own decisions." The sale closing was scheduled for Friday afternoon at the Foundation's downtown offices, timed to coincide with Madison and Daniel's planned visit to my house that evening. According to my sister's enthusiastic phone call, they would arrive with a realtor at exactly 6 o'clock to finalize the paperwork and get this situation resolved once and for all. Friday morning brought crisp October weather and a sense of anticipation that felt like Christmas morning combined with opening night of a play I'd been rehearsing for weeks. I spent the day carefully packing my personal belongings, knowing that my role in the house would change even though my residence would continue. The foundation planned to begin converting the main floor into community meeting spaces while maintaining the second floor as my private living area. Grandma Helen's bedroom would become my office, where I would coordinate services for elderly residents facing housing pressure similar to what I'd experienced. At 3 o'clock, I met Catherine and Marcus at the foundation offices for the official closing ceremony. The conference room was filled with legal representatives, foundation board members, and community activists who understood the significance of what we were accomplishing. This property acquisition represents more than just another community center, Marcus explained as we signed the final documents. It establishes a permanent foothold in a neighborhood that's been systematically targeted for displacement of long-term residents. Your courage in refusing to be intimidated is protecting dozens of other families. Jennifer Santos handed me the final deed transfer, officially completing my transition from property owner to community coordinator. Congratulations, Dottie. You now work for one of the most effective neighborhood preservation organizations in the state, and you've helped us secure a property that will serve families for generations. The financial arrangements exceeded everything I'd hoped for when this nightmare began. The foundation paid me $725,000 for the house, the full appraised market value that Madison and Daniel had tried to hide from me. My salary as community coordinator was generous enough to ensure financial security while allowing me to do work that felt meaningful and important. But the most satisfying moment came when Jennifer handed me a special folder containing legal documents that would be delivered to appropriate authorities on Monday morning. These are formal complaints against Daniel Richardson and Madison Patterson for property fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft through deception, she explained with obvious satisfaction. The evidence Catherine provided, combined with your testimony and the forged documents your sister filed, creates a compelling case for criminal prosecution. At minimum, they'll face significant civil penalties and permanent restrictions on future property acquisition activities. As we prepared to leave the foundation offices, Catherine pulled me aside for a private conversation. I want you to understand something important about what happens next, she said seriously. When Daniel realizes what you've accomplished, he's going to be furious beyond anything you've experienced before. People like him don't handle defeat gracefully, especially when it costs them millions of dollars. Are you trying to scare me? I asked. I'm trying to prepare you, Catherine replied. Daniel will try to intimidate you, threaten legal action, and possibly attempt to damage your reputation or relationships. But he'll be operating from a position of weakness now rather than strength. You've taken away his power to hurt you. The drive home felt surreal, like returning to a familiar place that had been transformed by invisible magic. Technically, I no longer owned the Victorian house on Maple Street, but I'd never felt more secure in my right to call it home. At exactly 5:30, I called Madison to confirm that evening's appointment. I'll be here waiting for you and the realtor, I told her cheerfully. I think you're going to be very surprised by how everything works out. I'm so proud of you for making the mature decision, Madison replied with obvious relief. This is going to be wonderful for everyone involved, and I know Grandma Helen would be happy to see the family working together. An hour later, I heard familiar voices on the front porch, followed by the sound of multiple car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the window, I could see Madison and Daniel arriving with a woman carrying a realtor's portfolio, along with my parents looking nervous but hopeful. The next few minutes were going to change my family's understanding of consequences forever. I smoothed my clothes, checked my appearance in Grandma Helen's hallway mirror, and prepared to open the door with a smile. It was time for the final act of this particular drama, and I intended to enjoy every moment of it. The doorbell chimed at exactly 6 o'clock, and I opened the door with the brightest smile I could manage. Madison stood on the porch wearing her most expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Behind her, Daniel Richardson looked every inch the successful businessman, while my parents hovered nervously near a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Linda Peterson from Premium Properties Real Estate. "Dottie," Madison exclaimed, sweeping past me into the living room with theatrical enthusiasm. "I'm so excited that we're finally going to get this situation resolved. You've made the right choice for everyone." Daniel followed with his practiced smile, but I caught the predatory gleam in his eyes as he surveyed the Victorians' original architectural details. "Ms. Patterson, thank you for being reasonable about this transaction. I think you'll find our offer is quite generous considering current market conditions." Linda Peterson bustled in with her portfolio, immediately claiming the dining room table as her temporary office. "I have all the paperwork prepared for signatures," she announced efficiently. "This should be a very straightforward sale once we finalize the price negotiations and inspection details." My parents entered last Dad carrying a bottle of champagne and Mom clutching a bouquet of flowers from their garden. "We brought these to celebrate our family working together," Mom said with tears of relief already forming in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you for choosing family unity over personal selfishness." "Well," I said, settling into Grandma Helen's favorite chair, "I think you're all going to be very surprised by how this evening develops. But before we begin, there's something I need to tell you about the house." Madison perched on the edge of the sofa, her excitement barely contained. "What is it? Did you decide you want to negotiate a higher split of the proceeds? Because I think we can work something out that's fair for everyone." "Actually," I replied calmly, "the house isn't available for sale anymore. I completed the sale transaction this afternoon." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Linda Peterson looked up from her paperwork with obvious confusion, while Madison's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and dawning rage. "What do you mean you completed a sale?" Daniel demanded, his polite facade evaporating instantly. "We have a verbal agreement for this property purchase." "We never had any agreement," I corrected. "You had an expectation that I would surrender my home to advance your business interests. I had different plans." Madison shot to her feet, her carefully controlled composure completely shattered. "You can't sell the house without telling us we've been planning this transaction for weeks." "I can sell my property to anyone I choose," I replied matter-of-factly, which is exactly what I did. The new owners should be arriving any moment to introduce themselves. As if summoned by perfect timing, the doorbell rang again. I rose to answer it, leaving my family staring at each other in stunned confusion. Marcus Williams stood on the porch along with Catherine Richardson and two other people I didn't recognize. "Good evening, Dottie," Marcus said warmly. "I hope we're not too early for the introduction meeting." "Perfect timing," I assured him, stepping aside to welcome the group into what was now officially their property. "Everyone's here and eager to meet the new owners." The explosion that followed Marcus and Catherine's entrance exceeded my wildest expectations. Madison took one look at Catherine and turned white as typing paper, while Daniel's face flushed dark red with what appeared to be fury and panic combined. "What the hell is she doing here?" Daniel snarled, pointing at Catherine like she was something dangerous he'd found in his garden. "Catherine Richardson, I'd like you to meet my family," I said pleasantly. Madison, Dad, Mom, this is Daniel's ex-wife and business partner. She's been helping me understand exactly what kind of situation I was facing. You conniving witch! Madison hissed at Catherine, her mask of family loyalty completely obliterated. You manipulated my sister into destroying our family's financial stability. I helped your sister avoid being victimized by your boyfriend's property fraud scheme, Catherine replied with admirable calm. The same scheme that's destroyed dozens of families throughout this region. Daniel moved toward the door as if preparing to escape, but Marcus stepped forward to block his path. Mr. Richardson, I believe you should stay for this conversation. My name is Marcus Williams, and I'm the director of the Neighborhood Preservation Foundation. We're the organization that purchased this property this afternoon. That sale is invalid, Daniel declared with desperate authority. The property owner was under family pressure and not competent to make such a decision. Actually, the sale was carefully documented to prevent exactly that kind of challenge, Jennifer Santos said, appearing in the doorway behind another man in an expensive suit. My name is Jennifer Santos, legal counsel for the foundation. This is Detective Robert Martinez from the Financial Crimes Division of the State Police. Dad's champagne bottle slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on Grandma Helen's hardwood floor champagne, and glass spreading across the room like a physical manifestation of our family's disintegration. Detective Martinez stepped forward with the professional calm of someone accustomed to arresting people in awkward social situations. Daniel Richardson, you're under arrest for property fraud, conspiracy to commit theft through deception, and violation of state real estate regulations. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda warning continued as Daniel's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and dawning recognition that his entire world was collapsing around him. Madison backed away from the detective as if arrest might be contagious, her eyes darting between exit routes like a trapped animal. This is insane, she said to anyone willing to listen. Dottie, you've destroyed our entire family over a piece of property. How can you live with yourself? Quite comfortably, I replied, watching Detective Martinez handcuff the man who'd tried to steal my home. Especially knowing that I've helped prevent Daniel from victimizing other families the way he tried to victimize ours. Linda Peterson gathered her papers and headed for the door with obvious relief at escaping whatever legal nightmare she'd accidentally stumbled into. I was never informed about any irregularities in this transaction, she announced to no one in particular. My agency will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Richardson Development. As the detective led Daniel toward his car, Catherine moved to stand beside me with a satisfaction that 5 years of planning had finally earned. The state attorney general has been building a case against Richardson Development for over 2 years, she informed my stunned family. Dottie's evidence was the final piece they needed to file formal charges. Madison turned on our parents with fury that had been building throughout the evening. This is your fault. You were supposed to convince her to sell, not let her ruin everything we'd worked toward. We tried, Mom whispered, looking older than I'd ever seen her. We thought we were helping everyone find a solution. You were helping yourselves to money you hadn't earned while destroying my security, I pointed out. The fact that Madison's scheme collapsed doesn't make your participation less shameful. Dad picked up pieces of broken glass with shaking hands, his dreams of easy money dissolving as thoroughly as the champagne soaking into the wooden floor. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now you go home and deal with your financial problems through legitimate means, I replied. Credit counseling, debt consolidation, maybe even bankruptcy if necessary. But you don't do it by sacrificing your daughter's future. Madison gathered her briefcase and headed for the door, pausing only to deliver one final attempt at emotional manipulation. I hope you're satisfied with destroying this family, Dottie. When Mom and Dad lose their house, remember that you could have prevented it. When you lose your boyfriend and face criminal charges, remember that you chose greed over family, I replied evenly. Everything that happens next is a consequence of choices you made freely. After Madison stormed away and my parents left in stunned silence, I sat with Marcus and Catherine in the peaceful quiet of my grandmother's living room. The house felt different now, no longer burdened by the weight of family expectations and manipulative schemes. "How do you feel?" Catherine asked gently. "Free," I answered honestly. For the first time since Grandma Helen died, I feel completely free. Outside police car lights faded into the distance, taking Daniel Richardson toward a future that would include criminal prosecutions, civil lawsuits, and the complete destruction of his predatory business empire. Inside, I began to understand what my grandmother had meant when she said some battles are worth fighting regardless of the cost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as I learned my role as community coordinator and helped the foundation begin converting the house into a resource center. But tonight, justice had been served with a completeness that left me feeling more satisfied than any family reconciliation could have provided. Some bridges are meant to be burned, especially when they lead to places that compromise your principles and endanger your future. I had chosen my grandmother's values over my family's demands, and the choice felt absolutely right. 3 months after that explosive evening, I stood in what had been Grandma Helen's formal dining room, now transformed into a bright conference space where families gathered twice weekly for workshops on recognizing and resisting property manipulation schemes. The Victorian house had found its true purpose as a beacon of hope for people facing the same pressures that had nearly destroyed my own sense of security. The Neighborhood Preservation Foundation had worked with remarkable efficiency to convert the main floor into functional community spaces while maintaining the home's original character and charm. Helen's kitchen became a comfortable meeting area where elderly residents shared coffee and strategies for dealing with aggressive developers. The living room now served as my office, filled with resources about tenant rights, elder law, and financial counseling services. My role as community coordinator proved to be more fulfilling than any career I could have imagined. Each week brought new families seeking help with situations eerily similar to my own experience, children pressured to sell inherited properties, elderly homeowners targeted by deceptive development schemes, and neighborhoods facing systematic displacement through financial manipulation. The legal consequences for Daniel Richardson and Madison had unfolded with satisfying thoroughness. Daniel faced multiple felony charges that would likely result in significant prison time and the complete dissolution of Richardson Development Corporation. The state attorney general's investigation had revealed a pattern of fraud spanning dozens of properties and affecting over 60 families throughout the region. Madison's involvement earned her 3 years of probation, substantial fines, and permanent prohibition from real estate activities in the state. More importantly, she faced civil lawsuits from multiple families whose properties she'd helped Daniel acquire through deceptive practices. Her financial future looked considerably bleaker than the luxury lifestyle she'd planned to fund through her boyfriend's criminal enterprise. The most surprising development came through my parents' response to their own financial crisis. After the initial shock of losing their expected windfall, they'd followed my advice about seeking legitimate help for their debt problems. Dad enrolled in a gambling addiction treatment program and found steady work with a nonprofit organization counseling other people struggling with financial recovery. Mom began attending therapy to address the shopping compulsion that had contributed to their debt spiral. More remarkably, she'd started volunteering at the community center using her experience with financial desperation to help other families identify the warning signs of manipulation schemes. "I'm ashamed of how we treated you," she admitted during one of our reconciliation conversations. Madison convinced us that you were being selfish, but we should have recognized that she was the one being manipulative. We let our desperation cloud our judgment about what was right. You were facing an impossible situation, I replied, surprised by how easily forgiveness came once they'd acknowledged their mistakes. Madison took advantage of your vulnerability the same way Daniel took advantage of hers. The important thing is that you've chosen to address your problems honestly instead of looking for easy solutions that hurt other people. Dad's transformation was particularly remarkable. His experience with gambling addiction gave him unique insight into the psychological tactics that predatory developers use to pressure vulnerable homeowners. He'd become one of our most effective volunteer counselors, helping families recognize when they were being manipulated and find legitimate resources for addressing financial difficulties. I understand now what those developers do. He explained to a group of elderly residents facing pressure to sell their homes. They identify your biggest fears and weaknesses, then offer solutions that seem helpful but actually make your situation worse. The key is recognizing that real help doesn't require you to sacrifice your security for someone else's profit. Catherine Richardson had become both a mentor and a close friend, her experience with Daniel's manipulative tactics providing invaluable guidance for my work with other victims. Together, we developed educational programs that helped communities identify and resist systematic property acquisition schemes before they could gain traction. You've created something remarkable here, Catherine observed during one of her regular visits. This house has become a symbol of resistance against the kind of exploitation that destroys neighborhoods and displaces families. Helen would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. The neighborhood transformation exceeded everyone's expectations. With Daniel's development project permanently derailed, property values stabilized, and longtime residents gained confidence that their community would remain affordable and welcoming. Several other families had followed my example by donating or selling properties to preservation organizations, creating a network of protected spaces that would serve future generations. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I found myself sitting in Grandma Helen's favorite rocking chair, now positioned by the window in my private living area upstairs. The autumn light filtering through original stained glass windows reminded me of countless afternoons I'd spent in this same spot during her final months, listening to stories about the house's history and the families who'd found shelter within its walls. A leather-bound journal lay open in my lap, its pages filled with my grandmother's careful handwriting. I'd discovered it hidden in her bedroom closet during the foundation's renovation work, apparently placed there during her final weeks, when she'd been too weak to share its contents directly. The entry, dated 3 days before her death, read, "I've decided to leave the house to Dottie because she understands what makes a place a true home. It isn't the building or the property value. It's the love shared within the walls and the commitment to protecting that love against people who would exploit it for profit. I know there will be pressure to sell after I'm gone." Madison has already made several comments about the house's potential that worry me. But Dottie has the strength to honor what this place represents, even if doing so requires difficult choices about family relationships. Another passage written just days before she entered hospice care proved eerily prophetic. "If anyone tries to force Dottie to sell this house, I hope she remembers that some battles are worth fighting regardless of the personal cost. Family loyalty shouldn't require sacrificing your principles or your security. The people who truly love you will respect your right to protect what matters most." Reading her words felt like receiving final guidance from beyond, confirmation that my choices had aligned with her deepest values and intentions. Helen had anticipated the pressure I would face and trusted me to find a solution that honored both her memory and my own need for security. The phone rang, interrupting my quiet reflection. Marcus Williams' cheerful voice filled the room as he shared news about a family in the neighboring county who'd heard about our success and wanted help resisting a similar development pressure campaign. "Word is spreading about what you accomplished here," Marcus reported with obvious satisfaction. "We're getting calls from communities throughout the region asking for guidance about protecting themselves from aggressive developers. I think we need to consider expanding the program." "I'd love to help other neighborhoods," I replied, already imagining the possibilities. "What would expansion look like?" "Mobile outreach teams, satellite offices, maybe even a statewide network of community coordinators who understand these tactics from personal experience," Marcus suggested. "You've proven that one person's courage to resist manipulation can protect entire communities. Imagine what we could accomplish if we replicated that success systematically." The conversation continued as we discussed training programs, funding strategies, and partnership opportunities with other preservation organizations. By the time we finished planning, I felt energized by the prospect of extending our impact far beyond the boundaries of Maple Street. As evening settled over the Victorian house, I prepared dinner in Helen's kitchen while reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment of unexpected fulfillment. 6 months ago, I'd been a struggling teacher, living paycheck to paycheck, overwhelmed by the responsibility of maintaining an inherited property and unprepared for the family betrayal that threatened to destroy my security. Tonight, I was a community advocate earning a comfortable salary while living in the home I'd successfully protected, surrounded by neighbors who'd become genuine friends, and engaged in work that honored my grandmother's memory while helping other families avoid similar victimization. The transformation felt almost miraculous, except I understood that miracles had nothing to do with it. What had changed my life was the decision to stop accepting other people's definition of what I owed them and start defending what I knew to be right. Standing at the kitchen window where Helen had watched seasons change for 40 years, I understood finally what she'd meant when she said that real strength comes from protecting what matters most. It wasn't about the house itself, although preserving it had been important. It was about refusing to let fear, guilt, or family pressure convince me to betray my own principles and future security. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to my comfortable apartment above the community center, I paused to read the small plaque Catherine had installed beside the front door. Helen Patterson Community Center, protecting families, preserving neighborhoods, honoring the past while building the future. Tomorrow would bring new families seeking help, new challenges in expanding our services, and new opportunities to prove that ordinary people can successfully resist extraordinary pressure when they understand their rights and find the courage to defend them. But tonight, I simply felt grateful for the journey that had taught me the difference between family loyalty and family exploitation, between reasonable compromise and destructive sacrifice. Helen's house had become exactly what she'd envisioned: a place where love protects against greed, where community strength defeats individual manipulation, and where one person's courage to say no can protect countless others from similar harm. Some stories end with dramatic reconciliation and forgiveness. Others end with justice served and principles vindicated. Mine ended with the quiet satisfaction of work that matters, relationships built on respect rather than obligation, and the knowledge that protecting what you value most sometimes requires letting go of people who would sacrifice your welfare for their convenience. Have you ever faced pressure from family members who wanted you to sacrifice your security for their benefit? How did you find the courage to stand up for what was right when everyone around you insisted you were being selfish? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sharing our experiences helps other people recognize that they're not alone when facing impossible family demands. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to hear more stories about people who found the strength to protect what matters most. Your support helps me continue sharing these important messages about recognizing manipulation and defending your right to make decisions that protect your future. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to stand up against family pressure or property manipulation schemes. Sometimes, one person's story of successful resistance can provide the inspiration someone else needs to protect themselves from similar exploitation. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that your security and principles are worth defending even when the people pressuring you claim to be acting out of love. True love supports your right to protect what matters most to you rather than demanding you sacrifice it for other people's convenience.